Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second talk in the Bloomfield Connections series. This evening we will be looking at the Bloomfield area within the context of the two world wars. Although the Bloomfield ward was only created in, I think, the 1950s, I'm using this ward map as a guide. At the time of the two world wars, most of the Bloomfield area was in Pottinger ward. On Sunday, 1st January 1921, the War Memorial tablet in Bloomfield Presbyterian Church was unveiled by Colonel Robert Sinclair Knox, who had been awarded the Distinguished Service Order during the Great War. The memorial tablet records the names of 15 men who were killed in the war and the names of 90 people who served. The final 7 names on the tablet belong to women that served. Susan Adrain was born at Doch and boarded at Cypress Avenue. She was a graduate of Queen's University and served as an orderly with the French Red Cross from August 1915, being awarded the British War Medal and the Victory Medal. Mary and Sarah Walker were from Ballyrogan near Newtownards, but were boarding at Howardon on the corner of North Road and Upper Newtownards Road in 1911. This was the site of Bloomfield Collegiate School at the time. They both enlisted with the Voluntary Aid Detachment and served as cooks at number 62 General Hospital in Italy. Mary also served at the Military Convalescent Hospital at Hollywood, and Sarah also served at the Military Massage Corps Depot at Knowsley Park in Liverpool. On Sunday, 5th June 1921, Sir James Craig unveiled the War Memorial tablet in St Donald's Church of Ireland, and the tablet, along with the War Memorial Bell, were dedicated by the Right Reverend Charles Thornton Primrose Grierson, Lord Bishop of Down and Connor and Dromore. The memorial tablet records the names of 35 fatalities and the names of 202 people who served. One of the names is Reverend Alexander Moore, the rector of the parish, who served as a chaplain during the Great War. After the Second World War, a new set of bells were installed in the tower to commemorate the ministry of Canon Alexander Moore. The Right Reverend Grierson returned to St Donald's on Sunday, 19th March 1922, to dedicate this window, which was the work of Ward and Partners of Belfast. It was unveiled by Mr. Thomas Scott of Dundela Park to commemorate his daughter who died in the sinking of RMS Lusitania. The theme of the 3-light window is the resurrection of Christ. The tracery windows feature the dove of the Spirit and the Alpha and Omega symbols. At the feet of Christ is the empty tomb, and the Roman soldiers set to guard the tomb. Some of them are stirring from sleep with bewildered and astonished expressions. The central soldier is sleeping, a flask clutched in his right hand. Margaret Armstrong Scott was born on 3rd October 1884 at the Park in Gorey, County Wexford, to Thomas Scott and Catherine Darby. In 1901, the family was living on the Upper Newtownards Road, and Thomas was recorded as being a provisions merchant. By 1911, the family was living at Dundela Drive. Thomas was now a horticultural instructor, and his daughter Margaret was recorded as being a designer. On 10 September 1912, Miss Margaret Armstrong Scott departed from Liverpool on SS Caronia, bound for New York, where she married George Alexander Anderson on 18 September. They lived at the Carnegie Building in Pittsburgh. Margaret Armstrong Anderson was 30 years old when she died when RMS Lusitania was torpedoed and sunk by the German submarine U-20 on 7th May 1915. The ship sank in 18 minutes with the loss of 1,197 lives. Margaret Anderson is buried in Common Grave C at the Old Church Cemetery in Queenstown, County Cork. Queenstown is now called Cove. On Sunday, 12th October 1924, Lady Jessie Muriel Bates, the wife of Sir Richard Dawson Bates, Minister for Home Affairs in the Northern Ireland Government, unveiled the War Memorial window in Bloomfield Avenue Congregational Church with these words: "I unveil this window to the glory of God and the memory of the men of this congregation who made the supreme sacrifice in the defence of their king and country. The 3-panel window was installed behind the pulpit and was accompanied by a memorial tablet naming the 11 men of the congregation who had died. The memorial window and tablet are not present in the current church building, and it's possible that they were damaged or destroyed during the German air raids when the Belfast rope works was incinerated. One of the men named on the memorial is buried in Dundonald Cemetery. John Campbell Mackintosh was born in Glasgow around 1900 to James Mackintosh, a foreman upholsterer, and Elizabeth Adams, and the family was living at 163 Bloomfield Avenue in 1911. Their house was near the junction with Greenville Street, and the rope works was located behind the house. Although the religious affiliation of the family was recorded as United Free Church of Scotland, the closest congregation was the one in Clifton Street, so the family probably attended the Congregational Church across the street. John Mackintosh enlisted as a driver with the Royal Field Artillery and was deployed to the Western Front in November 1916. He died of pyemia, or blood poisoning, at 2nd Western General Hospital near Manchester on 12th June 1917. He was 17 years old and was buried in Dundonald Cemetery on 16th June. The grave is marked by a family memorial. Between 1921 and 1939, 1,252 dwellings were erected in Northern Ireland for veterans of the Great War, and these were administered by the Irish Sailors and Soldiers Land Trust. 10 Type T houses were built on a half-acre parcel of land at Clara Avenue. The semi-detached houses were completed by April 1933, and the initial rent was 8 shillings per week, £27 per week in current terms. The first occupant of number 8, Lower Clara Crescent, was William Holden, who was a holder-up in a Belfast shipyard. He had served with the Army Service Corps and the Manchester Regiment and was discharged on 25th February 1919. He was awarded a 20% disablement pension in respect of gunshot wounds to his right thigh at the rate of 8 shillings per week, plus an allowance of 7 shillings per week for his dependents, and that was a wife and child. 15 shillings per week in 1919 would be the equivalent of £40 per week in current terms. William Holden was born on 29th September 1890 to William Holden, a rigger, and Elizabeth Biddle, and the family was living at Bright Street in 1911. William was a plater's helper and living at Hornby Street when he married Ellen Chalmers on 11th July 1914 at Westbourne Presbyterian Church. Their first child, John, was born on 17th October 1915 at Hornby Street. Ellen Holden died at Belmont Street on 13th May 1926, and William married a widow called Jeannie Black on 6th June 1930 at Dundella Presbyterian Church, which is now Knock Presbyterian Church. William Holden was injured at Ribble Street during the German bombings of 5th May 1941 and died at the Royal Victoria Hospital. He was 48 years old and is buried in Dundonald Cemetery, and he is named on the modern headstone at the plot. And this brings me on to talk about the effect of the German air raids on the Bloomfield area. On the night of 5th, 6th May 1941, the Bloomfield area was badly hit during the 4th and final German air raid. The Belfast City Council plaque records that 14 people died at Ravenscroft Avenue. However, the Civilian War Dead Roll of Honour only records Ravenscroft Avenue as being the death location for 5 people. When the fatalities from the side streets are included, the figure rises to 19. I've been unable to determine how the figure of 14 was arrived at, but it does not accord with the official figures. The following figures are based on names recorded on the Civilian War Dead Roll of Honour. 25 people who lived in the Bloomfield area died during the German air raids of 1941. The youngest fatality was Jean Holden, who was 4 years old, and the eldest fatality was Jane Neal, who was 79 years old. 10 of the fatalities were under 20 years of age, and 60 were over 50 years old. 22 people died in the Bloomfield area during the German air raids, with the highest concentration of fatalities being in Avondale Street. 13 residents died there, 2 at the Royal Victoria Hospital. 15 people died at Avondale Street. 3 of the fatalities resided in Hindford Street, and 1 lived on Beersbridge Road. This map shows Ravenscroft Avenue and its side streets before and after the German Blitz. The blocks in red indicate where houses were either destroyed or demolished because of safety concerns. For simplicity, I will use the term destroyed to cover both scenarios. From Bloomdale Street to Rosebery Street, 19 houses and Ravenscroft Public Elementary School were destroyed. Similarly, 6 houses on Westcott Street and 5 houses in Uniondale Street at their junctions with Ravenscroft Avenue were also destroyed. On the other side of the street, 13 houses between Beechwood Street and Moorgate Street were destroyed, along with 2 houses in Beechwood Street and 2 houses in Crystal Street. 2 of the fatalities in the Ravenscroft area were air raid precaution volunteers, and they are commemorated on the Belfast Civil Defence Memorial in Belfast City Hall. Both were 16 and both lived outside the immediate area. A high explosive parachute mine exploded at the junction of Ravenscroft Avenue and Crystal Street, leaving the massive crater depicted in this photograph. The first house on each side of Crystal Street were so badly damaged that they had to be demolished and later replaced. You can see the air raid shelter in the middle of the street, and you can see the railway cutting in the background. William James Mays, an ARP messenger from Lichfield Street, died at Rosebery Street, which is not far away. He was the son of William John Mays and Caroline Jane Gardner, and is buried in Dundonald Cemetery. There is no marker or memorial at his grave. This photograph, provided by Peter McCabe, shows Crystal Street as it is now. The line of the old railway cuttings can still be seen, and the first 2 houses are of a different design to the original houses. This photo shows part of Ravenscroft Avenue after the bombing. The shell of the public elementary school can be seen on your left, and in the middle distance you can see an electricity pylon that still stands today, and that gives a point of reference for the photograph. Thomas Crone Bingham, an ARP warden from Isoline Street, died at Ravenscroft Avenue. He was a son of Samuel and Elizabeth Bingham, and is buried in a named coffin in the Blitz ground or reserve ground at Belfast City Cemetery. This is Avondale Street, and in 1939 there were 35 houses in the street, but in 1943 only 15 houses were occupied, and they were all towards the Ravenscroft Avenue end. At the Bloomfield Avenue end, numbers 1 to 21 and numbers 2 to 20 were destroyed or demolished. 3 houses in Elmdale Street were also destroyed or demolished. The Civilian War Dead Roll of Honour records that 13 people died at Avondale Street, 9 being residents of the street. I have identified 2 additional fatalities from the Belfast City Council burial register. The bodies of a 10-year-old boy and a 7-year-old girl were found at the corner of Avondale Street and were later identified at the temporary morgue in St George's Market. They were buried in the reserve ground at Belfast City Cemetery on 7th May, and the coffins were marked with the surname Lemon. In 1939, a Walter Lemon was the occupant of 22 Avondale Street, and it's highly likely that he was their father. 8 people from the street were admitted to hospital as a result of the air raids, 6 with serious injuries. The injured included Robert and Elizabeth Neal from number 7 and Thomas and Wilhelmina Neal from number 15. Jean Neal from number 7 Avondale Street was killed at the age of 79 and has no known place of burial. 8 members of the extended McCulloch family died at number 8 Avondale Street on 5th May 1941. And the fatalities came from 3 families. William McCulloch, a holder-up at the shipyard, was 66 years old and is buried in a named coffin in the reserve ground at Belfast City Cemetery. His wife, Agnes McCulloch, formerly Dixon, was 64 and has no known place of burial. Their daughter, Charlotte, had married William Holden on 26 December 1935 at St. Donald's Church of Ireland. William was a son of the William Holden, who I spoke about earlier, who lived in the ex-servicemen's houses at Clara Avenue. In 1939, William, Charlotte, and their 2 young daughters, Jean and Shirley, were living at 113 Hindford Street. Charlotte Holden, who was at her parents' house with Jean and Shirley during the air raid, was 25 years old when she died, and Jean was 4 years old when she died. Shirley was seriously injured and admitted to the Royal Hospital for Sick Children. Charlotte and Jean are buried in the family plot in Belfast City Cemetery, but there is no marker or memorial at their grave. William McCulloch, a son of William and Agnes, had married Ellen McRoberts and they lived at 111 Hindford Street. Their son Ralph was 13 years old when he died. William, Ellen, and a son called William were seriously injured and admitted to the Royal Victoria Hospital. A daughter named Sadie was admitted to the Royal Hospital for Sick Children with slight injuries. John McCulloch and his family were living with William and Agnes at 8 Avondale Street. John was treated for slight injuries at the Royal Victoria Hospital, but 2 of his children died. Agnes was 6 and was buried in a marked coffin in the reserve ground at Belfast City Cemetery. Billy was 5 and has no known place of burial. Martha McNeil, known as Nancy, was 11 years old when she died. She is recorded on Commonwealth war graves as being the adopted daughter of William and Agnes McCulloch, but as their granddaughter in a death notice. This photo shows the extensive damage suffered by the Belfast rope works. In the distance, the tower of St. Patrick's Church of Ireland is visible. So this photograph would have been taken from Bloomfield Avenue direction. At the outbreak of the Second World War, the Belfast Rope Work Company was the largest in the world. Between 1939 and 1945, it manufactured a third of all the rope and cord used by Allied forces. It also manufactured other products for the war, including camouflage netting. As Brian Barton records, on the night of 5th-6th May, high explosives and incendiaries set fire to the rope works, which was still burning fiercely 24 hours after the all clear had sounded. Stocks of raw materials were completely destroyed, a number of buildings were gutted, and machinery was lost. The rupturing of water mains combined with the low flow of the Connswater River due to the tide meant that the fire service was unable to efficiently tackle the flames at the rope works and at adjacent commercial and residential properties. So moving on to the post-war period and the dedication of memorials in Bloomfield Presbyterian Church and St. Donald's Church of Ireland. On Sunday, 6th November 1949, the Reverend George Frederick Hampton Wynne, minister of Armagh Road Presbyterian Church in Portadown, dedicated the war memorial for the Second World War in Bloomfield Presbyterian Church. The memorial consisted of a carved oak screen enclosing the choir area, a tablet bearing the names of 8 fatalities, and a book of remembrance recording the names of 98 women, 98 men, and 12 women who served. I want to focus on one family, and that's the Malcolm family. Arthur George Ashby Malcolm, an engineer, had married Florence Lillian Cottle on 11th November 1911 at St Mark's Church of Ireland at Dundela. They initially lived at Kensington Avenue, but had moved to 394 Beersbridge Road after the birth of their first child. 3 of their sons and 1 of their daughters served in the Second World War. Robert Edward John Malcolm was born on 8th January 1912. Albert George Malcolm was born on 4th November 1913. Harold Arthur Malcolm was born on 27th February 1915. Dorothy May Malcolm was born on 26th June 1918, and Margaret Malcolm was born on 9th December 1920. I've not been able to identify the war service details for Albert, Harold, or Margaret. Dorothy May Malcolm died during the German air raid and was buried in Dundonald Cemetery on the 10th of May. The entry in the cemetery burial register records that she died at an air raid shelter on Beersbridge Road. However, the civilian war dead Road of Honour records that she died at Avondale Street. Dorothy is not commemorated on the Congregational Book of Remembrance. Her mother, Florence Malcolm, was admitted to the Royal Victoria Hospital with serious injuries as a result of the bombing. Robert Edward John Malcolm was serving with 1st Battalion Manchester Regiment when Singapore fell to the Japanese forces in February 1942. He was on the official missing list until July 1943, when his parents received a postcard saying he was a prisoner of war. Although Robert had written that he was in excellent health, he died on 11th September 1943, aged 31. He was originally interred in the Kanburi Base Hospital Cemetery in Siam, the old name for Thailand, and this was the burial place for men who died during the building of the Burma Railway. It is highly probable that Robert was one of the men forced to work on the construction of that railway made famous in the film The Bridge on the River Kwai. Ironically, his parents received a second postcard from Robert in July 1944, informing him that he was in excellent health and was in paid employment for the Japanese. This raises the issue as to whether the postcards were falsified by the Japanese to give hope to the relatives. It was not until September 1945 that Arthur and Florence were officially informed that their son had died. Robert Malcolm was reinterred in the Kanchanaburi War Cemetery on 20th January 1946. On Sunday, 10th June 1956, the Very Reverend Walter Horatio Good, Dean of Down, dedicated the Second World War Memorial at St. Donald's Church. The memorial consists of a set of solid silver communion vessels and a tablet naming the 24 people from the congregation who died during the war. The tablet was unveiled by Mrs. Ethel Ann Walsh, who had lost 2 sons in the war. Ethel Ann O'Neill had married Lieutenant Henry Jordan Walsh of the Royal Irish Rifles on 26 September 1918 in Gorey, County Wexford. After relinquishing his army commission, Henry Walsh joined the Royal Irish Constabulary and later transferred to the Royal Ulster Constabulary when it was formed in 1922. He held the rank of District Inspector when he retired, and the family was living at 16 Cypress Avenue in 1939. This is a photograph of a Handley Page Hampton aircraft, which was the type of plane in which John O'Neill Walsh lost his life. John was serving as a sergeant with 44 Squadron Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve when he died on 19th June 1941, when a recently repaired aircraft crashed near Market Drayton shortly after taking off from RAF Turnhill in England. He was 20 years old and is buried in the Newport Cemetery in Lincoln. Henry Jordan Dunlop Walsh was serving with the Merchant Navy on SS Svend Foyn when he died on 21st March 1943, aged 17, and is commemorated on the Tower Hill Memorial in London. The Svend Foyn, with a cargo of fuel oil, was part of a convoy from New York to Liverpool when she collided with an iceberg 70 miles south of Greenland. The ship foundered 2 days later, with 43 of the 195 crew and passengers being lost. Recently, a memorial panel was installed at Enfield Street in North Belfast, listing the names of the Blitz fatalities from the Woodville area. And I think it is something that should be considered for the Bloomfield area. Thank you.